All right, buckle up for a deep dive. This one's going to send chills down your spine, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're looking into the murder of Alyssa Burquette, young mother, caught up in a whole web of, well, deceit, you could say, and manipulation, big time. That ended really tragically.
Mm.
Our main source for this whole thing, from what you've told me, is that 48 Hours episode.
Yeah.
And you know those guys, they know how to, like, unpack those seriously messed up stories.
They really do. They get into it.
Have you ever, like, felt that, like something's off in a relationship? You get that gut feeling, but you just can't figure out what it is.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like a red flag, but you can't pinpoint it.
This case, it's all about those red flags,
Mm.
Those little signs, those subtle things that can turn into something really scary. What seemed like a pretty straightforward murder, at first glance.
Right.
It unravels, and it just reveals this dark truth.
It's amazing, how those first witnesses, what they said, it all pointed to this random act. Like, people were saying they saw this black man running from the scene.
Yeah.
So everyone just assumed. But what's really striking is Alyssa's own mother. She immediately suspected Andrew Beard.
Wow.
Yeah, the father of Alyssa's daughter, Willow.
Right.
So it makes you think, like, what was going on beneath the surface? There must have been some tension there, some history that the investigation had to sort through.
It's like a mother's intuition. Just cuts through all the noise,
Totally.
And when you, like, put Alyssa and Andrew side by side, it's like, what? They're so different. It adds this whole other layer to the story.
Oh, absolutely.
Alyssa, she was young, vibrant, totally loved being a mother to Willow.
Yeah.
And she was determined to make a good life for her daughter. Even went back to college. Worked hard to make ends meet.
Really dedicated.
And then you have Andrew. Successful, a house, even a plane.
Wow.
And he just wouldn't let up. He wanted primary custody of Willow. Yeah. Just drag Alyssa through this legal battle nonstop, just drained her emotionally and financially.
That financial strain, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
It really highlights how imbalanced their relationship was and how easily someone can use money to manipulate.
Yeah.
Imagine the pressure Alyssa must have felt thinking Andrew could just use his money to win the custody case.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And then things get even darker. Like the events before the murder, they're just disturbing.
Mhm.
There's this 911 call
Yeah.
from some guy, Frank Marrow. Totally made up name, right?
Mm.
He accuses Alyssa of, get this, dealing drugs from her car.
Oh, wow.
And the police, they search her car. Guess what they find?
What?
Drugs, a pistol, cash, planted in her trunk.
Planted.
Exactly what this Marrow guy described. It's like someone was setting her up.
Makes you wonder, right? Was it just to discredit her, mess with the custody case, or was it something worse?
Well, Alyssa, she thought it was something worse.
Really?
She texted her roommate. She said, he's going to try to get someone to kill me next. Yeah. She was terrified. Started taking precautions, texting her sister to check for anyone suspicious before she went into her apartment, that kind of thing.
Those texts, man, they just give you a window into her state of mind.
Yeah.
She wasn't just being paranoid, She was truly scared for her life.
And she was right to be.
Tragically.
Right. And then you have Holly Elkins, Andrew's new fiancée.
Ah, right.
At first, Andrew's mom, she actually kind of liked Holly. But things changed big time when they started dating. Andrew, he just got more aggressive, with the custody battle. Alyssa felt like he was watching her every move.
Adding Holly to the mix, it really changes things. Was she just, a supportive girlfriend, or was there more to it?
Right.
The fact that Andrew got so much worse after they started dating, it definitely raises some red flags.
Absolutely. Because, get this.
Yeah.
Holly sent Alyssa a text. She said she wanted them to have a healthy relationship, for Willow's sake.
Mm-hmm.
On the surface, it sounds nice, right? But knowing what we know now, it's almost creepy. Like trying to act all innocent.
Yeah, like a facade.
Exactly.
That difference between what Holly said and what was really going on, that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. You start to see this pattern, manipulation, hidden motives, and it all points to something way more complicated, way more disturbing than anyone first thought.
Okay, so let's talk about the day of the murder. Alyssa was attacked, broad daylight, in the parking lot of her work.
Jeez.
The attacker, people said he was a black man, shot her. And this is crazy, he came back and stabbed her.
No.
44 times.
That's brutal. Just shocking. It makes you think this wasn't just a random thing. This is personal.
And remember, Alyssa's mom, she immediately said it was Andrew.
Right. Right.
So the police start investigating, and in Andrew's house, they find some pretty incriminating stuff. Notes. They connect him to that fake Frank Merrill call. And a GPS tracker. The same kind they found on Alyssa's car.
So that's where it all changes. We go from suspicion to, like, hard evidence, linking Andrew to everything leading up to the murder.
But wait, it gets even crazier. They find this makeup vial in Andrew's truck.
Makeup?
Yeah, and guess what? It was used to make him look like a black man.
Oh, wow.
They even found the SUV abandoned with Alyssa's blood inside. And Andrew's like, disguise, a fake beard, all that.
All those witnesses, they got it all wrong. He totally staged the whole thing.
Right. But now Holly comes back into the picture.
Okay.
She was adamant. Andrew's innocent, she said. He was home with her, she said, when it happened.
Classic alibi, but do you believe it?
That's what the investigators thought, too, especially when they looked at Holly's texts with Andrew. She was saying some pretty nasty things about Alyssa, calling her ugly, fat, a bad mom, even baby mama.
Wow, she really had it out for Alyssa. Clearly saw her as a problem, standing in the way of, well, having Willow, I guess.
And then the big reveal. Andrew confessed to the FBI. But twist ending, he said Holly was the one who planned it all. Yeah, he said she manipulated him, pressured him to get rid of Alyssa. And she even seemed to, like, enjoy the details of the murder, he said.
So was he a willing participant, or was he more like a victim himself?
That's a huge question. And the investigators, they found texts from Holly pushing Andrew to do something to prove his worth.
Coercive control, that's what it sounds like, using threats, isolation, all this emotional abuse to gain power over someone.
And Andrew, he was already going through a lot. Custody battle, emotionally drained. Holly, she came in at just the right time, used his vulnerability against him.
Yeah, she totally took advantage of the situation.
So we've got this potentially a really manipulative person pulling the strings and a vulnerable guy caught in her web.
It's a tough one. Was Andrew a victim? He did pull the trigger. He did stab Alyssa.
Like, we're trying to figure out how much did manipulation play a role. But also, he made his choices.
This case is it shows you how complicated criminal responsibility can be.
It does. It's about seeing the whole picture. Right. The manipulation, yeah.
Okay.
But also the individual's vulnerabilities and the choices they made. What stands out to you? The potential manipulation or Andrew's accountability?
It's both, isn't it? It's all mixed up. And that's what makes it so interesting, this whole idea of exploring human behavior, the good and the bad.
And we're just getting started. In part 2, we'll get into the psychology of Andrew and Holly, their motivations, what fueled this toxic relationship.
Can't wait.
It's going to be a wild ride.
I bet.
We left off talking about Andrew and how that coercive control thing played a part.
Yeah.
And now we're like getting into their heads. This whole case, it really comes down to who Andrew and Holly are, So let's try to figure them out, starting with Holly. A lot of people say she might have narcissistic personality disorder. For those of us who, didn't study psychology, what does that even mean?
Yeah, good point. It's a term you hear a lot, but it gets kind of misused. So basically, someone with this narcissistic personality, they think they're super important. Like that.
They need everyone to admire them. And they have a really hard time seeing things from other people's point of view, like no empathy.
Right.
And they can be really manipulative, to get what they want. With Holly, we see this, she was fixated on Willow, didn't care about Alyssa's feelings at all. And she used Andrew, totally used him to get what she wanted.
And it's not just wanting things, right?
It's
that lack of empathy, like you said. Remember how she seemed to, enjoy hearing about the murder?
Oh, yeah. That's a big red flag. Taking pleasure in someone else's pain. People with this disorder, they often don't feel bad about things, They might even blame the victim for what happened.
Wow.
It's messed up. Holly, trying to say she was this dumb, manipulated woman.
Right.
That totally fits the pattern. She's deflecting blame, making herself out to be the victim.
It's crazy how someone can twist things like that. All the evidence points to her. She was the one in control the whole time. Yeah, she was pulling the strings. But, these personality disorders, they're complicated. Someone with narcissism, they might not even realize they're manipulating people.
Really?
Yeah. The way they see the world can be so distorted, they honestly believe they're the one who's being wronged.
So where does that leave Andrew? He confessed, but he says Holly manipulated him. So was he, in on it? Or was he a victim too?
That's the question, isn't it? From what we see, the evidence, what Andrew himself has said, it seems pretty likely Holly was using coercive control on him.
Let's talk more about that. You explained it before, but can you give us some concrete examples of how she might have used that on Andrew?
Sure. Think about Alyssa's mom, Teresa, gathering her daughter's things from the car, Willow crying for her mom.
Oh, man.
That just shows you how much this tragedy affected everyone. And with Andrew, we see signs of Holly isolating him from his support system, putting him down constantly, chipping away at his self-esteem. Remember those texts. Prove your worth. Threats, manipulation. It's all a pattern, to break someone down, get control over them.
And he was already under so much pressure. Custody battle, emotionally drained. Holly, she came in at just the right time when he was at his weakest.
Exactly. She knew what she was doing, preyed on his insecurities. By the time he realized what was happening, it was probably too late.
So we have this maybe narcissistic personality, calling the shots, and this vulnerable guy caught in her web. But even with all that, can we really say Andrew was just a victim? He did shoot Alyssa. He did stab her.
That's where it gets tricky. Holly's role in the murder, that's clear. But we can't just forget that Andrew made the choice to end someone's life. He's got to be held accountable.
It's like a balancing act,
Yeah.
Trying to understand how manipulation works, but also saying, hey, individuals have to be responsible for what they do.
Totally. This case just highlights how complex criminal responsibility is. It's about looking at everything.
The manipulation, yeah.
But also the person's vulnerabilities and the choices they make in the end.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer more complicated than the last. What about you as a listener? What stands out? The narcissism or Andrew's accountability?
There are no easy answers here. That's what makes this so thought-provoking, Exploring human behavior, all the nuances, having these tough conversations.
And we're not done yet. We still have to talk about the legal side, the impact of this case, and what we can learn to prevent this from happening again.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of time, unraveling this whole messed up relationship.
Yeah.
And the psychology behind it all.
Yeah. A lot to unpack there.
Big time.
Yeah.
But now let's switch gears. Let's look at, the legal side of things. Because this case, it really makes you think about what it means to be responsible for a crime,
Absolutely. This case, it wasn't like, oh, here's the murderer, end of story. The prosecution, they had to prove Holly was involved even though technically she didn't kill Alyssa.
Right.
They had to build this whole argument around the idea of a conspiracy.
Okay, so for those of us who, aren't lawyers, break that down. How did they convince a jury that Holly was part of this plan to kill Alyssa?
Well, they basically said that Holly, she was manipulating Andrew so much, so intensely, so constantly, that it was like she was practically, a co-conspirator. She didn't have to pull the trigger herself because she had, programmed Andrew to do it for her.
And the jury, they bought it, right. They found her guilty. Conspiracy to stalk, stalking with a dangerous weapon resulting in death. And her sentence, 2 life terms. That's a pretty strong message. They weren't fooled by her, poor little me act.
No, they saw right through it. And this verdict, it's huge. It sets a precedent, for future cases where there's this coercive control thing going on. It shows that the legal system, it's starting to see this kind of abuse as a serious crime, even though you can't see the bruises,
Yeah. It's a win for victims of this kind of abuse because for a long time it was just ignored or downplayed.
Right. This case, it's proof that the courts are taking it seriously.
It could really change how we view domestic violence cases. It's not just about hitting or punching. It's about this web of control, those psychological tactics that can be just as bad, if not worse. So this brings up a big question for me, and I'm sure for our listener too. How do we protect people who might be caught in this kind of situation? What are the warning signs, the red flags we should be looking for, not just in our own relationships, but in our friends' families,
That's the key. Awareness. We have to be able to spot those signs. Someone becoming more and more isolated, a partner who's always criticizing, putting them down, controlling their money, using threats, intimidation.
So let's say we do see those red flags. What do we do? How can we actually help?
The most important thing is to believe the victim, because this kind of abuse, it thrives on secrecy, on shame. Victims, they often feel trapped, scared to say anything. So listen without judging. Offer your support. Let them know they're not alone. Encourage them to reach out to a family member, a friend, a hotline. There are resources out there, but the first step is breaking the silence.
This whole case, it's just this chilling reminder that violence, it can take so many forms. It's not always the obvious stuff, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, that can leave scars just as deep.
Alyssa's story, it's a tragedy, no doubt. It's about deceit, it's about narcissism, it's about this need for control that ended up taking a young woman's life. But it's also about resilience. It's about a family fighting for justice. And it's about a legal system that, in this case, recognized how insidious coercive control can be.
It's heavy stuff, for sure, but hopefully it's a wake-up call. By understanding this case, by learning to see those red flags, we can all do something to stop this from happening again.
Knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about coercive control, the more we can help ourselves and others break free from these toxic relationships.
This deep dive, it's taken us to some dark places. Murder, manipulation, the dark side of human nature. But, hopefully you, our listener, are leaving with some hope too. Hope that by being aware, by talking about these things, by recognizing and dealing with these issues head on, we can build a world where relationships are about respect, not control.